This is not just a story about a plane crash in the Andes. It is a story about human beings trapped above the snow line in a frozen desert where there was no food, no rescue, and almost no hope of survival. For 72 days, they battled starvation, avalanches, freezing temperatures, and impossible choices just to stay alive.
It's a regular afternoon in Santiago, 3:21 p.m. At Los Cerrillos Airport, air traffic control receives a request from Flight 571 asking permission to descend and land. Permission is granted, but the aircraft never appears. Flight 571, a twin-engine Fairchild FH-227D turboprop, is flying from Montevideo to Santiago. On board are members of the Old Christians rugby team, along with friends and family. 45 people are inside the aircraft. Most of them are young. None of them know they are about to disappear into one of the deadliest mountain ranges on Earth.
Outside the windows lies the Andes Mountains. Endless snow, rock, and ice stretching across the horizon. In the 1970s, aircraft navigation was far more primitive than it is today. Pilots crossing the Andes relied heavily on timing, radio signals, and judgment. And that day, one small mistake changes everything. The pilots believe they have already crossed the mountain range and reached the safer Chilean side. After receiving descent clearance from Santiago Control, they begin lowering altitude. Then, suddenly, the clouds break. Directly ahead of them stands a wall of rock. The aircraft is still inside the Andes. The pilots push the engines to maximum power, trying desperately to climb, but the aircraft doesn't have enough altitude or enough time. The impact is catastrophic. At nearly 11,500 feet, the bottom of the plane slams into a mountain ridge. The back of the cabin is suddenly open to the freezing sky. Several passengers are thrown directly out of the aircraft into the mountains below. Inside the cabin, chaos erupts. People are crushed beneath seats and luggage. Others are bleeding heavily or screaming in pain. When the wreckage finally stops moving, 12 people are already dead. 33 survivors remain trapped high in the Andes, and night is coming. The survivors, who can still move, immediately begin helping the injured. Among them are two medical students, Roberto Canessa and Gustavo Zerbino. With almost no medical equipment, they begin treating broken bones, head injuries, and severe bleeding using torn fabric from the aircraft. Marcelo Perez, the captain of the rugby team, organizes the survivors into groups. Some clear debris, some gather luggage, some try to protect the wreckage from the cold. Because another danger is already arriving. The Andes are known for brutal temperature swings. During the day, sunlight reflecting off the snow can raise temperatures above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. But once the sun disappears behind the mountains, temperatures can collapse to nearly minus 30 degrees within hours. And the survivors are completely unprepared. Most are wearing light autumn clothing and leather shoes meant for a weekend in Santiago, not survival in the mountains. The back of the aircraft has been ripped open during the crash. Freezing wind tears through the cabin. Fido Strauch and his cousins begin stacking suitcases, broken metal panels, and packed snow to block the opening. It barely works, but it may save their lives. As darkness falls, the survivors slowly begin understanding how serious the situation really is. The pilot is dead. The co-pilot is trapped inside the crushed cockpit, slowly dying from his injuries. Nando Parrado, one of the passengers, lies unconscious with a severe head injury. His mother is already dead. His younger sister, Susanna, is badly injured. Inside the wreckage,
33 survivors squeeze tightly together for warmth. People shiver uncontrollably through the night while snow blows through cracks in the fuselage. By sunrise, 5 more people are dead. Now, only 28 survivors remain. At the same time, search aircraft from Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay begin searching the Andes. But the crashed fuselage blends almost perfectly into the snow. From the air, it looks like just another patch of ice on the mountainside. Back in Montevideo, families gather at schools, military offices, and airports waiting for news.
But inside the Andes, the survivors are already beginning to understand something terrifying. The mountain is not only attacking their bodies, it is slowly breaking their minds. Days pass. The sunlight reflecting off the snow burns their eyes. Many survivors develop snow blindness. Faces become covered with dried blood, sweat, dirt, and smoke. Nobody cares about appearance anymore. Only survival.
Inside the fuselage, nobody wants to say what everyone is already thinking. The bodies outside are frozen and preserved in the snow, and they are the only source of food left. The survivors are deeply religious young men. The idea horrifies them. Some immediately refuse. Others sit silently, unable to answer. But starvation keeps growing stronger every hour. The struggle is no longer just survival against the mountain. It becomes survival against morality itself. Finally, a small group, including Roberto Canessa and Fito Strauch, confronts the impossible reality. Without food, every single person inside the aircraft will eventually die. Slowly, the survivors begin trying to justify the unthinkable to themselves. They speak about sacrifice, about survival, and about keeping others alive. Finally, outside the aircraft in freezing silence, Roberto Canessa uses a broken piece of glass to make the first cut. To protect what little sanity they still had, the survivors never openly discussed whose bodies were being consumed. Most of them did not want to know. Asking those questions would have made the psychological weight unbearable, because the dead were not strangers. They were friends, teammates, brothers, and family members. An unspoken silence formed inside the fuselage. Food was prepared quietly, distributed quietly, and consumed quietly. Over time, emotional numbness slowly replaced shock. The process became mechanical, something the survivors forced themselves to do simply to stay alive. But beneath that numbness was unimaginable psychological pain. Every survivor understood exactly what the mountain had forced them to become. That night, the survivors make an agreement. If anyone dies on the mountain, their body may be used to help the others survive.
Then comes another devastating blow. On October 23rd, survivor Roy Harley repairs the aircraft's radio. Everyone gathers around the speaker, hoping to finally hear rescue news. Instead, they hear the opposite. Authorities officially announce that the search for Flight 571 has been called off. The passengers are presumed dead.
Days turn into weeks. The survivors settle into a painful routine of rationing food, melting snow, and fighting exhaustion. Then, just after midnight on October 29th, disaster strikes again. A massive avalanche crashes down the mountainside and slams directly into the fuselage. Tons of snow explode into the cabin within seconds. Most survivors are asleep when it happens. Suddenly, they find themselves buried alive in complete darkness. People scream beneath the snow. Others claw desperately with bare hands trying to free trapped survivors.
many cannot breathe. When the avalanche finally stops, 8 more people are dead. Among them is Marcelo Perez, the leader who helped hold the group together since the crash. For the next 3 days, a blizzard completely buries the fuselage beneath snow. The survivors are trapped inside in total darkness. Oxygen levels drop dangerously low. Using metal rods from broken seats, they punch tiny holes through the snow just to let air enter the cabin. There is almost no room to move. Some survivors are forced to sleep beside the frozen bodies of friends who died during the avalanche.
November becomes a slow war of exhaustion. Every survivor grows weaker week by week. Simple tasks require enormous effort. Wounds refuse to heal. Gums bleed. People become skeletal. But the idea of escape continues growing. The survivors begin preparing an expedition team. Nando Parrado, Roberto Canessa, and Antonio Vizintin. Using insulation from the aircraft and copper wire, they build a rough sleeping bag to survive nights outside. Then, on December 11th, one of the strongest survivors, Numa Torquati, dies after weeks of physical collapse. His death changes everything. Now, only 16 survivors remain, and for the first time, they fully understand the truth. If nobody leaves the mountain soon, every remaining survivor will die there.
On December 12th, after nearly 2 months trapped inside the Andes, the escape attempt finally begins. Parrado, Canessa, and Vizintin leave the wreckage and begin climbing into the mountains. Their condition is terrible. They are starving, exhausted, severely underweight, and carrying almost no proper climbing equipment. Ahead of them rises a massive mountain wall, nearly 15,000 feet high. Every few steps, they collapse into the snow, trying to breathe. For 2 days, they continue climbing. Then Nando Parrado finally reaches the top of the ridge. He expects to see green valleys and civilization on the other side.
Instead, he sees something horrifying. More mountains. In every direction. Endless snow-covered peaks stretching to the horizon. At that moment, they realize the pilots were far more lost than anyone imagined. They are much deeper inside the Andes than they ever believed. The little food they carry will never last long enough for all 3 men. So another painful decision is made. Antonio Vizintin returns to the fuselage so the remaining food can be shared between 2 people instead of 3.
For days, Parrado and Canessa kept moving through the Andes without knowing if they were heading toward life or deeper into death. Every step drained what little strength remained in their bodies. But stopping was no longer an option. But slowly, something begins changing around them. First, they find naturally flowing water, then patches of green moss, then a lizard. For the first time in over 2 months, the mountains no longer look completely dead. By December 21, they descend below the snow line into a rocky valley. Their condition is horrifying. Their feet are bleeding. Their faces are burned black by wind and sunlight. Both men have lost nearly half their body weight. Then, suddenly, they see something impossible. Tin cans and cattle. Human life. That evening, Nando spots a man on horseback across a roaring river. It is the first person they have seen in 70 days.
The man is a Chilean cattle herder named Sergio Catalan, but the river is too loud for anyone to hear each other. Before leaving, Catalan shouts that he will return the next morning. For Nando and Canessa, it becomes one of the longest nights of their lives. The next morning, Catalan returns.
He throws a pencil and paper tied to a stone across the river. Nando quickly writes a message. "We come from a plane that crashed in the mountains. There are still survivors alive in the wreckage. We need help immediately." Catalan reads the note. Then he throws bread across the starving men. Without wasting another second, he rides toward the nearest police station to alert authorities. The news explodes across South America. Families who spent weeks mourning suddenly hear something impossible. Survivors from Flight 571 are still alive. The Chilean Air Force immediately launches rescue helicopters. And on the afternoon of December 22nd, the remaining survivors inside the fuselage hear a sound they haven't heard in 72 days. Helicopters.
The noise echoes across the mountains as rescue aircraft appear above the glacier. Some survivors begin crying. Others simply stare in disbelief. Because of the dangerous altitude, only a few survivors can be rescued at a time. 6 men are flown out during the first trip. The others spend one final night in the Andes. Then, on December 23rd, the remaining survivors are finally rescued. After 72 days trapped in one of the harshest environments on Earth, 16 survivors leave the Andes alive. But survival comes at a terrible cost. Most have lost nearly half their body weight. Many suffer from severe dehydration, frostbite, malnutrition, and deep physical exhaustion. Soon, the story becomes worldwide news. Newspapers call it the miracle of the Andes. But days later, photos from the crash site reveal the truth about how the survivors stayed alive. The world is shocked. On December 28, the survivors publicly explained the impossible decisions they were forced to make. Over time, Flight 571 becomes one of the most famous survival stories in history. Books are written, films are made, museums preserve objects recovered from the crash. But beneath all the headlines and documentaries, the story remains something much deeper. Not just a plane crash, not just survival, but a story about how far human beings are willing to go when death becomes unavoidable, and how, even in the coldest and most hopeless place imaginable, some people still refuse to give up.
If you'd like to support the channel and help me continue creating documentaries like this, consider subscribing. It genuinely helps more than you think.